Hello everyone, the Clumsy Shark here. In today's video, you'll get introduced to the chess pieces and you'll get to know them. You will learn how to set them up on a chessboard. You'll get to learn about their point values and how to use them effectively. Let's get into it. The pawn is the least powerful piece in chess. It has a point value of 1. Each side starts with 8 pawns, 4 on the light squares and 4 on the dark squares. White's pawns start on the 2nd rank, while black pawns start on the 7th rank. When a pawn first moves, it can either move 1 or 2 squares up, and if a pawn has already moved, then it can only move 1 square at a time. The pawn covers the squares in front of it diagonally, so this pawn here would cover this square and this square, while this pawn here would cover this square and this square. However, even though your pawn is your weakest piece, don't underestimate them, as they work really well together because they can lock up the opponent's position and prevent their pieces from moving where they want to. Or pawns can help you open up your position when you need it by sacrificing a pawn so that your position is open and you can have more attacking chances. Pawns are also very dangerous at the end of the game, because if a pawn reaches the end of the board, so if this pawn reaches this square over there, then it can be turned into either a queen, rook, bishop, or knight, which will give you a winning advantage at the end of the game when most pieces are off the board. So don't underestimate pawns, as they can be really strong when they work together, or towards the end of the game when you really need to promote it to a piece that will allow you to win the game. When the game starts, each side has 2 knights, one on the king side and one on the queen side. White's knights are located on b1 and g1, while black's knights are located on b8 and g8. The knight is considered a minor piece and is worth 3 points. The knight is an interesting piece as it has an interesting movement compared to all the other pieces. The knight kind of moves in an L shape, so it can either move 2 squares up or down and then 1 square left or right, or it can move 1 square up and 2 squares either left or right. In this case, it'd be 1 square down and 2 squares either left or right. So in this case, this knight right here would be able to control all 8 of these squares and move to any of these squares. The knight captures on what it lands and not what it jumps over. So in this case, the knight would be able to capture the bishop here, but it would not be able to capture the pawn it has jumped over. The knight is the only piece that can jump over another piece in chess. Knights are really powerful when the position is close, as they can jump around the board and go to spots that other pieces cannot go to. Knights are really good at forking, so in this case, when this knight jumps here, the knight has forked the king and the queen. So the king will have to move and you will be able to capture the queen on the next move with your knight. There's nothing better than getting a knight fork and being able to capture the queen for a knight. It's such a good feeling. However, when this happens to you, or a knight forks one of your best pieces, or in case forks your king and queen, there's nothing worse, and it is really frustrating, but this shows the power of the knight. It can be really good to fork other pieces as well, like not even just the king and queen, but it can fork 2 pieces simultaneously. So you will either have you will have to decide whether to capture it if it is possible, or you will have to decide which piece you will have to give up. In most cases, knights will fork the queen and another piece, and since you don't want to give up your queen, you will have to move it and lose another piece. When the game starts, each side starts with 2 bishops, one dark squared and one light squared bishop. White's bishops are located on c1 and f1, while black's bishops are located on c8 and f8. The bishop is a minor piece just like the knight and is worth 3 points. However, some people believe that bishops are much stronger than a little stronger than knights and should be worth 3.5 points. However, this is up to personal preference. Some people may like knights better than bishops, and some people may like bishops more than knights. A bishop can move diagonally on its color, so in this case, this bishop can move to any of these squares diagonally. So these squares right here, the bishop can move to these squares diagonally as long as it's not blocked by its own piece. So in this case, the bishop would not be able to go through this diagonal since the knight blocks it. However, it could go to these other diagonals. If there's an opposing piece that controls a square on the diagonal, then the bishop cannot move past that piece. So in this case, we can see that the other dark squared bishop is blocking this dark squared bishop. So in this case, the dark squared bishop will not be able to go to these squares. Instead, the dark squared bishop could just capture this piece. If you're having trouble remembering how a bishop moves, just kind of think of the bishop as moving as an X shape. So we can see that in the middle of the board, it moves kind of like an X shape or a multiplication sign in this case. The bishop captures an enemy piece by moving to the square that piece was on. So in this case, the bishop, in order to capture this other dark square bishop, this bishop would just have to go onto the square it's at, and the piece is captured. Bishops are really good when the position is open and they can just fly around the board. Bishops are great at pinning other pieces. So in this case, we can see that the bishop pins the knight to the king, so the knight is unable to move. The bishop is also great at forking other pieces just like the knight. So in this case, when our bishop moves to this square right here, it attacks the king and checks it, and also attacks the rook. So in this case, it has forked the king and the rook, so the king has to move, and the bishop will capture the rook on the next move. Bishops are also great at skewering other pieces. In this case, we can see that the bishop is skewering both rooks, and that if one of them moves, say this square, then the bishop will capture the other rook. The bishop pairs really well with the queen. You will get most of your checkmates at the beginning with kind of a queen and bishop attack. So in this case, we'll see that the bishop and the queen are both aiming at this square. So if your opponent just plays some random move like here, then you will checkmate your opponent. The queen checkmates the king, and it's supported by the bishop. I like to think of bishops as kind of snipers because they can control extremely long diagonals, and sometimes if you're beginning, just like me, sometimes you'll just completely forget that they're there, and you will end up losing a piece or even just getting checkmated. So bishops are really strong. If you know how to use them, they can be an extremely powerful piece. Each side starts with 2 rooks when the game starts, one on the king side and one on the queen side. All 4 rooks start on the corners of the boards, and white's rooks are located on A1 and H1, while black's rooks are located on A8 and H8. The rook is considered a major piece and is worth 5 points. The rook is a very strong piece because it can move any squares up or down vertically, or any squares left or right horizontally. The easiest way to remember how a rook moves is to think of a plus sign. So in this case, we can see that the rook, kind of all possible rook movements, which are here, will form a plus sign. Since your rooks start at the corners of the board, it is important to get them into the center of the board as quickly as possible, and make them connected as well. Rooks are good when they occupy an open file. An open file is pretty much a file where there are no pieces on it. So this rook right here controls this open file, and it's really good because any piece that pretty much goes to any of these squares without protection will just get captured. Another important thing is that the rook pairs well with the queen. When the rook and the queen are on the same file, they form a battery, and it can be really powerful, because if your opponent does not defend it properly, then it could lead to checkmate or your opponent losing significant material. So I'll be on the lookout for the queen and rook battery. Rooks are also good at pinning other pieces. So in this case, this rook is pinning this bishop to the king, so this bishop cannot move. Rooks are amazing during the endgame, as they can protect a pawn to promotion. Rooks are amazing during the endgame because they can protect pawns to promotion, or they can completely cut the king off from advancing to another pawn. So rooks, you will have most of your endgames will involve at least one rook, and learning how to use your rooks effectively could be the difference between you winning or losing a game. And also, do not be afraid to sacrifice your rook during the endgame if it means that your pawn will promote to a queen. Also, it is possible to checkmate the opponent king with only a king and a rook. However, you can checkmate the opposing king with just a rook and a king. It will take a bit of patience, but if you know how to do it, it can be extremely powerful, because if you only have a rook and a king, and you know how to pretty much get a checkmate with only a king and a rook, you will win a lot of games. So rooks are a pretty underrated piece, but if they're used effectively, they can be extremely powerful. The queen is your most powerful piece. It is your heavy hitter. The queen is the strongest piece in all of chess. When the game starts, each side starts with one queen. White's queen is on d1 when the game starts, and black's queen is on d8 when the game starts. The queen is a major piece and is worth 9 points. The queen is what happens if you combine a rook and a bishop together. It can move any square left or right horizontally, any squares up or down vertically, and as many squares as it wants diagonally, just like a bishop. So the queen pretty much just covers all of these squares right here. A lot of squares. And so that is why the queen is your most powerful piece, because it can cover that many squares, which is almost pretty much just a quarter of the chessboard, which is just absurd. If you're ever having trouble remembering what moves the queen can do, just think of all the legal moves that a rook and a bishop could do, and then you'll have the moves for your queen. Your queen is your most valuable piece, so do not bring it out really early, as it could get attacked by other pieces. So in this case, let's say I bring out my queen here, my opponent could just move his pawn here, and this bishop is attacking my queen. So since your queen is your most powerful piece, you will have to move it. So I'll have to move it here, and I'm losing time. And you don't want to lose time, because then your opponent will have an advantage. So don't move your queen early, and move it during kind of later stages when all your other pieces are been developed. You should not be afraid to sacrifice other pieces in order to keep your queen. So in this case, we can see that the knight has forked the queen and the bishop. So in this case, you do not want to lose your queen. So you will probably just move it here, and then the knight will just take the bishop. Even though in this example, yes, the bishop, but it's just an example. Just don't be afraid to just sacrifice other of your pieces in order to keep your queen, as it's just your most powerful piece. The queen is a great attacking piece. You'll get most of your checkmates with it. However, it's not a very good defending piece, as other pieces can go and attack it. There's nothing better than sacrificing your queen in order to get a checkmate, and afterwards actually being able to complete that checkmate. If you decide to sacrifice your queen, you will either have 9,000 IQ, or you will either have minus 9,000 IQ. Because either you sacrifice your queen and you know what you're doing, or you sacrifice your queen and you have no idea what you're doing, and you pretty much have lost your strongest piece. If your opponent sacrifices their queen, then it can either mean two things. Either A, they know what they're doing and they will probably checkmate you pretty soon, or B, they just have no clue what they're doing and they just gave you a free queen. So if you ever see that you can take a queen, do a quick calculation, see if you will be checkmated, and if not, just take the queen. It is much easier for you when the queen is off the board, and when you still have your queen. You can checkmate the opposing king with just a queen and a king. However, you should be careful with your queen because it covers so many squares. It can be really easy to block all the squares for the opposing king, which will result in the draw, which is a stalemate, because the king will be unable to move. The king is the most important piece in all of chess. The goal of the game is to checkmate your opponent's king. Each side starts with one king. White's king is located on e1, while black's king is located on e8. The king has no value attributed to it, as if it is captured, then the game is over. The king is not a very powerful piece, as it can only move or capture one square in front of it. So this king right here could either move or capture to any of these squares. The king cannot be captured, and an attack on the king is called a check. So if the bishop moves here, then it is attacking the king, and that is known as a check. You have a couple of ways to deal with the check. You can either move the king out of check. You can either block the check with another piece, or you can capture the piece that is checking your king. An attack on the king where the king cannot move and capture the piece attacking it is called a checkmate. So in this case, queen is attacking the king, but the king cannot capture the queen because it is defended by the bishop, and the king has no squares to go because the queen is covering all of the king's escape squares. The king is pretty much a useless piece at the beginning of the game. It is in the middle of the board and it's kind of exposed to some attacks from your opponent, so your main priority would be king safety at the beginning of the game. The king and rook have a special move called castling, where the king moves two squares on either side. You can either choose to castle on the queen side or on the king side. Castling on the king side tends to be safer, and it's the fastest way to do it. However, castling on the queen side can lead to some very aggressive play on your behalf. So castling looks something like this. If I decide to castle on the king side, then my king would move two squares and the rook would be next to the king. If on the contrary I decide to castle queen side, then it would look something like this. Castling cannot occur if your rook on the side that it's on has moved. So in this case, my rook has moved here, and I'm unable to castle here, but I'm able to castle here. However, if my rook moves here, then I can castle on neither side. You cannot castle if your king has moved. So in this case, you are unable to castle. You cannot castle if your king moves into a check. So in this case, castling would lead your king to being in check, so you cannot castle there. If you are in check, you cannot castle to get out of a check. The king is a useless piece at the beginning of the game. However, when most of the heavy hitting pieces like the queens and the rooks are off the board, the king can actually be a really strong piece. When it's a king and pawn endgame, and you know how to use your king effectively, it could be it could be the difference between you losing, winning, or drawing the game. If you are on the side where you have a pawn and it's going to promotion, you can use your king to defend it. And if you know how to use your king effectively, you will be able to promote your pawn and win the game. On the contrary, if you are on the other side and you know how to move your king effectively to force a draw, then it could make you go from a losing position to a draw. So knowing how to use your king effectively in the endgame is important. So now you have gotten to know all of the chess pieces. Go out and play some chess games and have some fun. I hope you learned something from this video. Thank you for watching. Drop a like if you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.